2.3 is finally here, and with it brings our favourite worker, Zani. She was a character I was pretty dead set on pulling for, skipping both Cantarella, and I also tried to skip Phoebe, which turned out to be a bad decision. However, I decided to try and snipe Lumi on Phoebe's first banner and accidentally pulled her instead, which luckily for me made me more prepared for Zani than I otherwise would have been. So in this video, I want to go over her kit, her weapons and sequences, how you can build her, talk about her teams, and finally give my thoughts on her, including her issues and some of the tips that I've found while using her. But let's get started with her kit. However, if you already know how she functions, feel free to skip over this part of the video as it can be pretty boring. Her basic attack chain is a 4-part combo that will have Zani attack the enemy with a shield, doing slashes, shield bashes, and whatever kicking someone with a shield is called. In this combo, if you don't immediately follow up her basic attack 3 with another attack, she will launch herself backwards falling onto a chair before delivering a sick one-liner that won't do any spectro damage, but it can do emotional damage.
Miss!
That all you got?
You sick son of a bitch.
This is what I'll call her chair state, with the start of it being indicated by a small flash. If you perform a basic attack from her chair state, Zani will perform a shield drill attack called Breakthrough, leaving the shield spinning in front of her while she stretches. This attack will continue for a short duration and can be cancelled with a basic attack that will lead into her regular basic attack 4. Zani's dodge counter is the same as her basic attack 3, just dealing slightly more damage and will lead into her basic attack 4 or her chair state. Her plunge attack will have her slam her shield straight down to the ground. This attack can be followed up with her basic attack 3. Zani's heavy attack will have her throw her shield out in front of her, doing a short range attack before it boomerangs back. This attack can be triggered after most of her other attacks with a few exceptions, and also chains into her basic attack 3. All of Zani's normal attacks will generate Forte, with the standard combo generating half of her gauge for one cycle. But the breakthrough attack especially will generate Forte very quickly, and we'll talk about what her Forte does a little later. That summarizes her normal attacks, so let's move on to her skill. Zani's skill will have her do a shield bash in a short range in front of her, generating Forte and entering into a block stance. This stance will last for a short duration and will reduce damage suffered from attacks by 100%. If Zani performs a basic attack from this stance, she will do her basic attack 3, however this version will generate 10 more Forte and will stagnate enemies hit by the final strike for a short period of time. If Zani is attacked during her block stance, this will trigger a counter attack which will do a few things, including stagnating enemies in a short range around her, casting the pinpoint strike counter attack, reducing the enemy's vibration strength by 5%, and reducing her damage taken by 30% for 2 seconds. This skill will do nothing if you don't either attack or get hit by an attack during the block stance, and has a short cooldown of 5 seconds. Somewhat moving on, let's talk about her Forte. The most important thing to mention about her Forte is its passive ability. When Zani is on the team, all Spectrofrazzle stacks applied onto enemies will be immediately consumed and converted into helical embers. I'm just going to call these embers though, as I'm not even sure I pronounced this right the first time. These have a maximum cap of 60, with each stack lasting 6 seconds. Some important things to mention here. It is stated in the description that Ember stacks count towards Spectrofrazzle stacks specifically for the Eternal Radiance set. However, these are not considered as Spectrofrazzle stacks for other things such as the damage increase for Nightmare Morning Aches, meaning this Echo will not deal more damage like you might expect. If you reach 60 Embers, Spectrofrazzle stacks won't start to accumulate in addition to Embers, and any additional Spectrofrazzle stacks will still be consumed. That being said, this passive is very important for building one of Zani's Forte gauges, of which she has 2 that we'll talk about now. The top is her regular Forte gauge that will accumulate over time from her attacks. Once full, Zani's skill will change into an enhanced skill called Crisis Response Protocol. This skill is very similar to her normal skill with some differences. Instead of a block stance, her shield will morph into a greatsword, entering into a ready stance lasting for a short duration, which will make her immune to interruption and reduce damage suffered by 100%. Zani cannot attack out of this stance like her regular skill, however releasing the skill button or having the stance expire will trigger the targeted action attack. If Zani takes damage from an attack during the ready stance, this will trigger the forcible riposte attack, which will stagnate the enemy, reduce the enemy's vibration strength by 5%, and reduce Zani's damage taken by 30% for 2 seconds. This skill does not have a cooldown. Both the counter and non-counter versions of this attack have a few things in common. They both scale off skill damage as well as spectrofrazzle damage. They have the same scaling, dealing the same amount of damage overall. Will apply 1 stack of embers to all enemies hit by the final strike. And lastly, we'll have Zani enter Sunburst mode for 14 seconds. Sunburst mode is gained at the very start of the attack animation. While in Sunburst mode, spectrofrazzle damage dealt by Zani will be amplified by 20%. So that's her regular forte. Zani's bottom forte gauge can be thought of as your liberation forte, which can only be filled by accumulating blaze. Blaze is obtained whenever spectrofrazzle stacks are converted into embers or after the final hit of the enhanced skill. Something to mention here, the final hit doesn't have to hit an enemy in order to generate blaze, but blaze will not be generated if the final hit is cancelled by dodging or being interrupted. She can hold up to 100 blaze, generating 5 for every spectrofrazzle conversion and 10 for every use of her enhanced skill. So now let's talk about the coolest part of her kit, being her liberation. Upon casting Liberation, Zani will rip her jacket and tie off, dealing AoE damage, and enter Inferno mode. When entering Inferno mode, the blaze cap will increase from 100 to 150 and will grant 50 blaze. It will also increase the basic attack multiplier by 25%. While in Inferno mode and while Zani has at least 30 blaze, she will wield her greatsword, changing her basic attacks into heavy slashes. These heavy slash attacks are considered as both heavy attack damage and spectrofrazzle damage. Her skill will also change into Scorching Light, which will act very similar to her enhanced skill and doesn't have a cooldown. Now, the description for her liberation has a bunch of different things it'll do, so I'm going to try and break it down as simple as I can. There are 4 different heavy slashes she can do in her liberation: Daybreak, Dawning, Nightfall, and Light Smash. If you just spam attacks, she will do a basic attack combo consisting of Daybreak, then Dawning, followed by Nightfall. This is essentially your basic attack 1, 2, and 3. If you dodge an attack and perform a dodge counter, this will trigger the Light Smash attack, which is followed by Nightfall. This attack is basically identical to Dawning or basic attack 2, except it seems to consume less blaze. If you use your skill Scorching Light and don't either block an attack or wait for a period of time, this will lead into Daybreak, doing the basic attack combo. If your skill blocks an attack, this will lead into Light Smash, followed by Nightfall. This version of Light Smash will stagnate the enemy, reduce the enemy's vibration strength by 10%, and give Zani 30% damage reduction for 2 seconds. If your skill is held down long enough to either hear the blade charge or until the stance ends, this will lead straight into Nightfall, bypassing the Daybreak and Dawning attacks. Nightfall is Inferno mode's hardest hitting attack, provided you have enough blaze. It will consume up to 40 blaze over the attack's duration, with each blaze consumed increasing the damage multiplier of Nightfall. This attack also has 2 stages, being Nightfall Stage 1 and Nightfall Stage 2. If you dodge out of Stage 1 to either move or dodge an attack, then immediately follow this up with a basic attack, this will go straight into Nightfall Stage 2, doing the final big slam. All of her greatsword attacks require blaze to be used. However, if you're mid-combo and run out of blaze, this will not stop you from performing the rest of the combo. Once your blaze gets below 30, Zani's normal attack and skill will return to their shield versions. Fun fact, you can't generate normal forte in Inferno mode, however you can generate blaze for your liberation forte. So future echoes that can inflict spectrofrazzle, or characters that can do it either quickly through quick swap or from off-field like Psychona, might be able to extend Inferno mode's damage window a lot further. The last attack she can do in Inferno mode is her liberation ability, the Last Stand. This will pause time, launching Zani into the air before she and her sword slam down to the ground, doing AoE damage. This skill will become available either after blaze gets below 30 or after being in Inferno mode for 8 seconds. Inferno mode has a duration of 20 seconds. The state will not end if she's switched off the field. Any leftover blaze will remain, being saved for your next liberation, and her liberation ability has a cooldown of 25 seconds. Her intro skill will perform multiple attacks against the target and will also generate half of her regular forte gauge. Her outro skill will deal an average amount of damage on its own, however this will also consume all ember stacks on the enemy. For each stack the target has, the damage from her outro skill will increase by 10%, making the ceiling of this ability's damage 750% and is considered as Spectro-Frazzle damage. This ability will also amplify Spectro damage dealt by her team by 20% for 20 seconds against targets that were marked by embers. Now, I did do some testing to see if there was a weird rotation where Zani could use her own outro skill to buff herself. However, the buff is for everyone in the team except for Zani. Her first inherent skill will give Zani 12% Spectro damage bonus for 14 seconds after casting her intro skill, and her second inherent skill will reduce all damage taken during her ready stance by 40%. That's her kit. So let's move on to her sequences and weapon and if they're worth pulling for. Her S1 gives 50% Spectro damage bonus for 14 seconds after using her enhanced skill, and it also has the passive effect of making Nightfall uninterruptible, which can be pretty valuable. Her S2 gives a passive 20% crit rate, while also increasing the damage multiplier of her enhanced skill by 80%. Her S3 will increase the damage multiplier of Last Stand by 8% for each blaze consumed up to a maximum of 1200%. To reach this threshold, Zani would need to consume a full Liberation Forte gauge or 150 blaze. Her S4 increases the attack for the whole team by 20% for 30 seconds when Zani casts her intro skill. Her S5 increases the damage multiplier of her first Liberation ability by 120%, and her last sequence is a massive boost for Inferno mode, increasing the damage multiplier of her heavy slashes by 40%, increasing Nightfall's multiplier by 40% per blaze consumed. While in Inferno mode, she will regenerate 70 blaze when blaze falls below 70. This can only be triggered once per Inferno mode's duration. And lastly, she will gain a single death save if struck by a fatal blow during the first 8 seconds of Inferno mode, which will leave Zani with 1 HP. This can make Zani incredibly difficult to kill, being able to tank multiple killing blows over the course of a fight. Now let's move on to her weapon. Her weapon has a rather large amount of base attack with a crit damage substat. Its passive gives 12 to 24% attack, and casting basic attacks grants 8 to 16% defense ignore to her attacks, while also granting 50 to 100% Spectro-Frazzle amplify for 6 seconds. This can be very easy to proc for Zani, however it can be inconvenient in certain scenarios, like straight after her intro skill if an attack is incoming. So should you pull for her weapon or her sequences? Her weapon is definitely best in slot and is probably the best option to pull for in terms of damage output. However, if you either already own or plan to pull for Rachia's weapon, her S1 is probably more valuable to your account, as Rachia's weapon's passive is more universal, and gaining S1 will make Zani immune to interruption during her hardest hitting attack. So for free-to-play players or monthly pass owners, getting her to S0R1 is good, but if you have Rachia's weapon, S1 is better. However, one more thing to point out here, this is only if you plan to build your 4-cost Echo to be the opposite of her weapon's main stat. For instance, if you have a crit damage substat weapon, then you have a crit rate main stat 4-cost and vice versa. I don't personally plan to build her that way, and when I finally get the gear for it, I plan for my Zani to have her weapon, which is a crit damage substat, and also a crit damage main stat 4-cost. I'll talk about why when we go over her Echo sets. If you're a light spender or dolphin, you might be expecting me to say her S3 is a good stopping point, but unless you really like the idea of the final strike dealing really good damage, getting a sequence that doubles the damage of a single attack that's only going to happen once per rotation isn't worth it in my opinion. So my stopping point would be S2R1. Lastly, if you're a whale, you probably already maxed her out by the time of watching this video, so good job, she's busted now. Now let's quickly talk about her Echo sets before we talk about her teams. Her best in slot set is Eternal Radiance, giving 20% crit rate when inflicting enemies with Spectro-Frazzle, which can be procced by your team, and 15% Spectro damage bonus for 15 seconds after attacking an enemy with at least 10 stacks of Spectro-Frazzle. I did test this, and the embers do count towards proccing the 15% bonus. Her best Echo on this set is Captainess, giving 12% Spectro and heavy attack damage bonuses for just having it equipped in the main slot, and it's also a summon Echo, so it's unlikely to interrupt your rotation. Her other option is Nightmare Morning Aches, as it gives 12% Spectro damage bonus for being in the main slot, and this Echo is also great for dealing damage against enemies inflicted with Spectro Frazzle. However, Embers don't count as Spectro Frazzle stacks, so it will not proc the extra damage, making this Echo her second best option. Something to mention here is this also applies to other characters in the team, so if you're running Phoebe or Spectro Rover on the Eternal Radiance set, then they would also be better off on Captainus, as he has better multipliers while also giving heavy attack bonus as well. The second set that she can use is the Celestial Light set. Now, this set can work pretty well, and from my testing can technically do really good damage, but there are a few downsides to running this set. Morning Aches, which is a transform echo, is the only real option, as Jue gives skill damage bonus, which isn't as useful. Morning Aches' Spectro and Liberation damage bonuses are only granted for 15 seconds after using the echo skill, making it a must-use ability before you start your rotation, and it would also likely require you to have a crit rate main stat echo or her S2 to offset the loss in crit rate from the Eternal Radiance set. So you can keep this as an option, but I would personally run Eternal Radiance just for the ease of use. For the most damage, her best build is on Eternal Radiance with 34311. The main stats that you want to aim for is crit damage on the 4 cost, even if you're running her weapon, Spectro damage bonus on her 3 costs, and attack percent on her 1 costs. Her substat priority is crit rate and crit damage. I would try to get her to about 50% crit rate minimum and then full send crit damage. Next is energy regen. I found for a team around 115% is the minimum. However, depending on how you play, this could be a little bit higher. And for duos, you want around 125%. Third is attack percent and heavy attack bonus, with attack percent being slightly better as it increases the damage for her whole kit. And last is flat attack. However, liberation damage bonus can be good if you have S3 or S5, and skill damage or basic attack damage can be good if you're soloing. One more thing that I'll mention is if you're running in a team without Shorekeeper, depending on how happy you are to crit fish, you might want to consider aiming for more than 50% crit rate, and maybe even running a crit rate weapon or main stat 4 cost to offset losing Shorekeeper's Stellar Realm. So with that out of the way, let's talk about her teams. As most people are likely aware from discussions we've seen about Zani's teams, she is reliant on having a way to inflict Spectro Frazzle stacks to do the best damage that she can. This can be rather restrictive in terms of team options, with the only current picks for Spectro Frazzle being Spectro Rover or Phoebe. Phoebe is easily the winner in terms of Zani's best teammate, allowing for fast rotations, lots of reliable Spectro Frazzle stacks, team-wide Spectro Frazzle amplify on her outro. Her weapon, if you have it, will also amplify Spectro Frazzle, giving an even greater boost in damage, and she also has more options in terms of how you can build Phoebe and what gear she can use. Spectro Rover currently is the only other choice and is more of a budget option. Rover doesn't inflict as much Spectro Frazzle as quickly, making this an overall worse rotation. Because Spectro Rover doesn't amplify Spectro Frazzle like Phoebe does, the only sets that are really viable for team damage are DPS sets like Eternal Radiance or Celestial Light, making Rover more of a sub-DPS to pick up the slack for Zani's lower damage output. Rover is a melee character with a very average moveset, making bosses and enemies that move away harder to apply stacks reliably, and in wave-based content, Rover's range can really hold them back in terms of team utility. This makes Spectro Rover rather cope in my opinion, with Phoebe being the better option in every aspect of Zani's team. Shorekeeper is still the best healer in the game, making her the best choice for your third slot. However, Zani will also work with Verena and Baija. So Zani's best team is easily Zani, Phoebe, and Shorekeeper. However, Mortefie can also be an okay option in a meme team, such as Zani, Mortefie, and Phoebe, being able to pump out some pretty respectable damage. I actually quite liked this team, and it kept my Shorekeeper free to use on other teams in Tower of Adversity. However, it does lack sustain, making it a good option in more predictable fights. So what are my thoughts on Zani? I feel very mixed about this character. She excels in some environments, but feels too restrictive in others. In terms of damage output, she is one of, if not the best main DPS character in the game. She has a pretty fast rotation, her Inferno mode attacks all deal insanely good damage, her blocking abilities can very quickly reduce an enemy's vibration bar to 0, while also giving her another option instead of needing to rely on either dodging or parrying. Her best in slot buffer buffs Spectro Frazzle for the whole team for 30 seconds instead of the regular 10 or 14% for one character, making Zani's field time less restrictive while also allowing for a quick swap playstyle, or even running her in a team with a second amplifier like Mortify. And finally, let's be honest, Great Swords are fucking cool, Charge Blade from Monster Hunter is fucking cool, and she's a bit of a mix of the two. She's also hot as, and Inferno mode looks badass, so there is that too. However, in terms of character potential, she is incredibly restricted in a lot of ways. She will struggle to exist on any team that doesn't consist of Spectrofrazzle. I've seen some people make the argument that this is a team building game, so Zani needing a certain type of character isn't bad. My argument against that is there's a difference between team building and team collecting. Zani can only function at a good level in a Spectrofrazzle team. If she's put into a team without Spectrofrazzle, her DPS falls off a cliff. Whereas a character like Camellia will work really well in a Havoc and basic attack team and can be paired with Rachia as a buffer. However, she can also work in a basic attack team with Senhua or a Havoc damage team with Dan Jin. But for Camellia and most other DPS characters in the game, it doesn't even stop there. She can also work in a team that boosts neither Havoc or basic attacks because she has everything that she needs to function at a base level in her own kit. This is where Zani falls off. Most other characters in the game can fit into unoptimal teams while still doing their job, allowing for the player to build their own team the way they want. If Zani doesn't have Spectrofrazzle on the team, she struggles heavily to keep up with most other characters in the game. This makes her incredibly difficult to use in a team in the way the player might want to. Then there's issues the character has that make her feel a little bit less fun to use than she could have been. Like how she loves to block attacks, but while casting Nightfall, her skill will get locked, making it so that you can't use your ability to block an attack and can only dodge or quick swap instead. This feels like the devs were intentionally trying to make her less flexible for the sake of trying to force the player to swap to another character during the animation, which I really don't like. When you're using her block abilities, if you use the ability too early, damage can hit you through the stance as the window for counterattacking an attack is shorter than the animation, which can lead to confusion from the player. This can feel worse depending on the fight, as some attacks in the game are really bad at actually landing on the player, leaving your perfectly timed block to do fuck all. And because Zani's block abilities only reduce damage from attacks by 100% instead of voiding the attack entirely, this can have debuffs and dots still land from a successful block, leaving this cool ability feeling a bit more frustrating to use for no-hit players and styling players. Somewhat on that note, she sort of sucks to solo with, not because she can't do it, I've soloed some of the holograms already, with the hardest one I've done so far being Sentry, but because too much of her damage is locked behind needing to build her Liberation Forte, which the best way to build it is through Spectrofrazzle stacks. Just for a quick comparison, and this is going to be a little bit unfair, but it took me 4 minutes to beat Sentry with Zani, who is a main DPS character, whereas it took me 2.5 to beat it with Brant, who is a sub-DPS character. While in Inferno mode, she does have a good dodge counter being Light Smash that gives iframes for countering through attacks. However, if you try to perform a dodge counter while Nightfall is available, rather than countering with Light Smash, you will instead counter with stage 1 or stage 2 of Nightfall, depending on what part of the combo you were in. This attack suffers from the same problem Chun-Li's enhanced basic attack does, not having iframes when it's used as a dodge, which can be frustrating to deal with. I really don't understand why Kuro not only keeps designing characters who have ways to counter that don't have iframes, but also why they haven't decided to fix old characters with the same issue, as it feels pretty cheap when it happens. So I am happy with Zani, but she has issues at the same time. But before we talk about if I would recommend pulling for her or not, let's go over some tips and tricks for her that I was able to find. In Inferno mode, her dodge counter and block counter abilities are incredibly strong while not using much Liberation Forte. The block counter is typically better than dodge counter, as block counter will always trigger the Light Smash attack and give 100% resistance to damage for a short period of time, whereas the dodge counter has the potential to lead into Nightfall, which doesn't have iframes. So when in Inferno mode, use your block counter instead of your dodge counter wherever you can. The block counter can also be spammed pretty easily to avoid damage, damage, making it very strong against some bosses. Her first liberation ability is fantastic for setting up a block counter, with you being able to hold down either basic attack or skill during the animation to make you go straight into the ready stance when the animation ends. Her block abilities can be very helpful if you find yourself being victim to dodge locking after accidentally spamming dodge, allowing players who might not have the combat knowledge for certain attacks to have a plan B for miscalculating the attack's timing. If you do happen to be inflicted with a dot, a well-timed block can negate dot damage, making this an option to avoid some damage over time. This could potentially be useful in future fights if Kuro decides to give a boss some kind of one-shot debuff. This will be more useful to solo players, but Zani's shield drill attack generates a lot of forte and can be used to quickly rebuild the gauge for her enhanced skill. You can do this rotation fairly quickly to spam enhanced skills, however it doesn't make her that much better to solo with. The shield drill attack is also incredibly good at parrying. Speaking of parrying, try to avoid using Zani's regular skill to guard against grab attacks. I noticed with Monkey that his grab would trigger the block counter, but the grab would end up being successful anyway. So whenever you're going up against grab attacks, just keep this in mind. When you're guarding against parryable attacks, guarding slightly before the parryable attack will sometimes result in being able to perform a block counter, while also parrying with the counter at the same time. Lastly, for style players, both her normal mode basic attack 4 and Inferno mode's Nightfall attacks are abilities that can be used to avoid some low to the ground attacks provided you have good timing. Overall, Zani is a character that I really want to love. My favourite character for ages in Genshin Impact was Beidou, and one of my favourite characters from PGR was Wan Shi. So I was really hyped when I found out that she had the ability to block and counter attacks. She's one of the most unique characters to come to the game, and I would love to see more characters with kits similar to hers, or at least similar to the fundamentals of her kit. But getting to play her for myself, I was left wondering why they made her so restrictive, why her guard abilities reduced the damage suffered to 0 instead of ignoring the damage from enemies to prevent debuffs from bleeding through, why guard animations themselves will lose their ability to counter attacks after a short period of time even though the animation itself is still active, why they gave her the ability to continue the Nightfall attack after a dodge, but when it's used as a counter attack it doesn't have iframes. Ultimately, I am more disappointed because I can see how good she could have been, but ultimately for whatever reason, Kuro decided to restrict her instead of letting her shine. Now, would I recommend people to pull for her? Yes, I absolutely would, and there's a few groups of people who I think would love Zani. Players who are trying to collect up-to-date meta teams, I think her team is one of the strongest in the game currently. Players who like to style on enemies, she has a lot of little things you can do with how she plays to style on enemies, including sitting back on her chair while letting the echo finish the enemy for her. And if you care about waifu over meta, you probably don't need me to tell you this, but she has one of the best character designs in the game, with one of the best VAs we've seen so far. So for those groups of people and probably a few others that I haven't thought of, I would absolutely recommend Zani. However, for everyone else, I do think that your pulls could be better spent on less restricted characters such as Carlotta, Camellia, Brant, Cantarella, and other strong characters who are likely to come out in future. But that's my thoughts on Zani, so I'd like to thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video or you found it helpful in some way, feel free to leave a like, and if you'd like to see more content in future, you can subscribe to the channel. One last thing that I'll say before we wrap this up, I don't claim to know everything about characters or even be right about whether a character is good or bad. These videos are purely based off my experience with a character, which is why you won't see me make a video on a character I don't own. But that will do it from me, so I hope to see you in the next video, and I'll catch you later.